God, this is cool. So, I'm not even recording. That works. Start recording. That works. It's recording. It's on. Yay! I got it to work. Hello to all you guys out there in YouTube land. Yes, it's me, DR. And this is kind of a follow-on to my video about morality. Many times I get asked as an atheist, where do I base my moral system on without an objective morality? How do I make moral choices? Most of the time I don't get asked like that. It's almost like, how do you know you're not gonna kill someone without a god? So really and truthfully, this is kind of, and I've thought about this for a while, so I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to put this into a right consciousness for you guys, but for me I just kind of wanted to spell out almost how I make moral decisions. Now this is not going to be a moral catch-all. There's always going to be something that takes longer than a video to formulate and to work through, but this is literally for me how I believe, because I could be quite wrong about this, how I believe I make moral choices, how I make moral decisions. So the first thing I think about is what harm am I causing to people around me? So am I causing harm that is unnecessary? For me, if I have to, hit someone in the chest to restart their heart, technically I'm causing harm, but that might be necessary for a better cause. I don't use things like the golden rule. I think that really and truthfully, the rules that I use to exist in society are kind of the similar things I apply to other people. So I do look at it from my own perspective. I think what would I want people to do to me, and I try and behave that way to other people. What would I allow other people to do? If I wouldn't allow other people to steal from me, then I don't steal from other people. If I wouldn't like other people to lie to me, then maybe I shouldn't lie to other people. I use that as a kind of, I hate using the term golden rule, but as a starter for 10. I say, what behavior would I allow to happen to me? So would I want someone to be honest to me? And the answer is yes. So maybe I should be honest to other people. I'm in a social environment. I'm a social creature. So to behave in that context, maybe that's the kind of starter for 10 in terms of how I look at things. As things get more complicated, what I try and do is I try and pick the route of least harm from my perspective, obviously. I weigh up other people's opinions, I weigh up the experience of other people, but I try and pick things that have caused the least harm. So, for example, answering the ridiculous, and I think it is ridiculous, claim that without an objective morality, people would just go around killing people. If you would allow people to kill you, then you have justification to kill other people. If you would not want to be killed yourself, then maybe you should allow the same right, I don't think right's the right term, but the same permissions, the same values to other people. If you wouldn't want someone to steal from you, maybe you shouldn't steal from other people. If you wouldn't want someone to cause harm to you, maybe you shouldn't cause harm to other people. Because what is permissible for me is permissible for everybody else. In my head, in my opinion. I think if I have the right to do whatever I want with my body, then so do other people. And I think that's where a lot of conversations come about rights. We turn around and we go, I have the right to do this, but you don't have the right to do that. And that's where conversations start to digress into arguments. That's where the conflict arises. Because when someone does try to add an inequality, so say I am the speaker for a deity, therefore I'm allowed to do this, but you're not allowed to do that. That's where the difficulty arises in some people's opinions, and especially for me. I think if I'm not allowed to do something, but you are allowed to do it, unless there's some justifiable reason behind that, and justifiable to me and maybe to the rest of society, then actually I find that cognitive dissonance, I find that disconnect to be quite unreasonable. And for me, that's where kind of, if you want to stem my idea of morality, it's the most simplistic way I can describe it. I think if you're allowed to do it, then I'm allowed to do it. And I actually find a lot of conflict happens internally because for that very reason, that I think if you're allowed to do it, then I'm allowed to do it. And if I'm not allowed to do it, then why is it then reasonable? And actually, I find that that's the challenge that most people have in understanding a lot of the challenges they have with me, because they do something and then I challenge on it, but on the basis if you're allowed to do it, then when I did it there was a problem, but when you did it, it wasn't. And actually people can't grasp that idea of fairness. I don't want to say equality, but that most people can justify it from their own perspective because they're in their own heads, but don't understand that because people can't see inside their own heads, it's hard to justify to someone else. Also, I'm a big believer in behavior over intention. So a lot of people say I've got good intentions, but the behavior is negative. I find that actually, because we can't see intentions, we really have to have a high degree of trust to believe someone's intentions, that behavior is more important. So for me, it's behavior that you deliver. So if you talk about being moral, someone could say I'm very moral, so they can attribute themselves with morality, but it's about demonstrating that, and you only demonstrate your morality with the behavior that you exhibit. So also, there's I have a lot of thought about, is my behavior exhibiting a good judgment? Is it, and I know good is quite subjective, but we're all subjective. When I watch things like the Atheist Experience and people talk about morality, really what they're doing is they're attributing what they know and they go applying it to maybe a book and seeing what they want to see from their own subjective mind, and then attributing some objectivity to this. Whereas, as I said, my degree of morality is really, what would I want to happen to me? Now, I know that doesn't apply to all people. The old, psychopath, sociopath, someone wants someone to do something to them, therefore, as I said, the golden rule, do unto others that you'd want done unto yourself. It doesn't necessarily apply when you're dealing with people like that. So you need to have, what you do need to have is discussions where we come together as a group and say, actually, socially, what are the consensuses? What do we agree upon? And that's the wider discussion that tends to happen on vehicles like YouTube and things like that. But from an individual perspective, I'll share with you quite honestly, I think about, okay, what would I allow, what would be permissible to me? What would be permissible to me, I might have to make permissible to you. So for example, if I want freedom of speech, what I can't do about is censoring other people's freedom of speech. That's a bit hypocritical, and I find that happens a lot, where someone goes, I know what's right, so I can say these things, but you can't say these things because you're socially or economically or racially different. I find that quite weird, and I disagree with some of those arguments that some people have, that morally I can say something, and maybe it's not even a moral argument, maybe I'm grouping these together, but I think if we're talking about right or wrong, if you're allowed to do it, then I'm allowed to do it, and there needs to be some kind of real massive justification behind why that's not the case. Is it the case that physically you're not able to do it? Mentally, you might not necessarily have the capacity to do that. So extra things have to be brought into consideration. You know, we make different rules for animals. I might be allowed to, I don't know, jump up on a human being. Maybe you don't want an animal to do it because there's less control behind it. I think you can make those distinctions, you know, how much awareness they have of reality. But at the same point, maybe I'm wrong, and you guys can tell me. Maybe I'm seeing it from a totally ill perspective. But for me, it's all about what reasonably can I do to do the least harm in society. I used to say the most good, but the challenge is good then adds another degree of subjectivity. I know harm is equally so, but there are some situations where no good can come of what you do. There are some situations where you are saying something to someone and you know that the end result might potentially be great, but the immediate impact is going to be harm. So I kind of use least harm nowadays. What do I do that cause the least harm? And if I can approach it from that standpoint, then for me, I'm being a moral agent. I'd love to know what you guys think. I put this out there, I put myself there. I'm probably going to find someone making a video about this and using this for their own religious cannon fodder because they think that it's ridiculous and airheaded. Actually, I think when most people look at what they do exactly the same thing. They think about least harm. They explore least harm. They might try and benchmark it to something because actually morality is a very difficult subject. It's more complicated, and especially when you try and talk about, you know, your agency, not just locally, but globally, you know, the butterfly effect. When you do one thing, you can really kind of get dragged in and brought into the mindset that your one action can have impacts far-reaching into history. I mean, the person who created CFCs didn't create CFCs to create holes in the ozone layer. You know, was that a moral decision? As I said, it kind of starts the mind rolling. And personally, I kind of wanted to put this out there, maybe to get you guys thinking. How do you decide you're a moral agent? How do you make moral decisions? It's quite, as I said, it's quite tricky. So I've kind of distilled it down. Least harm makes sense for me. I'm really curious into how do you make your moral decisions? Just as I said, I don't believe in a specifically objective morality. I think we can come to objective conclusions based on subjectivity. Things like killing people is generally wrong. Why? Because you have a consciousness, I have a consciousness. Robbing you of your consciousness unnecessarily means that actually I am doing a major harm. I'm taking a finite consciousness and eliminating it, which actually is quite harmful, because if I allow the unnecessary elimination of your consciousness, then potentially I'm allowing the unnecessary elimination of my consciousness, which I wouldn't want to happen. Therefore, to me, that's morally wrong. I'm curious, actually, as I formulate this, as to you guys' feedback on this. Anyway, this is DR saying peace out, have a safe journey wherever you're heading. And how are you moral? Write in the description bar.